Secretary Satterfield, what is our purpose in Syria? Will we accept anything less than, would we accept a compromise that would keep Assad in power, at least in part of Syria? Or is our goal and our purpose only to totally eliminate the Assad government?
Mr. Rohrabacher, our purpose of our forces in Syria, as Secretary Mattis, Chairman Dunford have stated repeatedly, is to defeat ISIS. The purpose of our diplomacy, of our international engagement with respect to Syria, is to support a political process which at its end has a revised constitution, elections conducted under the auspices of the United Nations, and our belief is that those elections, if freely and fairly conducted amongst all Syrians, including the emigre Syrian communities, would not produce the survival of the Assad.
Well, let me just note, what you described wasn't just Syria, but probably 3/4 of the countries of the Middle East. And if we made those demands of, why is it that Syria, we have to make those demands against Syria and not against all these other countries in the Middle East?
Because, sir, of the extraordinary depredations of this regime in this country against its citizens, because of the extraordinary and historically unprecedented in modern times outflow.
You don't think the rest of the countries of the Middle East have similar track records? You're trying to tell me that, well, we heard the same thing, of course, about Saddam Hussein. We heard the same thing about Gaddafi, and we end up creating total chaos in that part of the world.
No regime in modern history in the Middle East, including Saddam Hussein's, has killed as many of its own citizens, has produced external and internal displacement of its own citizens on the scale of the Assad regime. No, it's unique, sadly.
Well, let me just say, Mr. Ambassador, you read history differently than I do. That is an area that is filled with dictators. It's filled with authoritarian regimes, filled with our allies, that if people rose up against them as they're rising up against Assad, he's a bad guy, he's a dictator, he's everything you said, but he's not that different from these other regimes once they are challenged. Once they were challenged, don't tell me the Qatar government wouldn't mow down all of their guest workers if there was an uprising in Qatar, and vice versa with these other regimes. I'm very disturbed by the fact that we're sliding into a war and not having an out that will not lead us to major military commitments to that region, and that would be a disaster. And I think it's based on the analysis that you just said, that Assad is somewhat different than everybody else. I don't think so. Thank you very much, Mr. Assistant Secretary.